Greetings folks and welcome to the Electromaker Show. This is your midweek roundup of all things Maker and embedded and lovely. This week we have a nice mixed show of projects and we're heading back to DIY Electronics Kickstarter to see what's been going on there. We also have some new products and news updates and a mystery box competition. So with all that to get through, let's get on with the show. We're starting this show with Breadware, a unique project which is the first major update to breadboards in, well, decades, a really long time, and something so inventive that I couldn't have even imagined it existed until I saw it. It's really quite special. This is a project on Hackaway by Kevin Santo Capuccio, and what you are seeing here in this rather nice image, I'm not in the way, excellent. This top part here is what you would think of as a traditional breadboard setup, and on here, these are the components that you put on a breadboard. Where it gets super special is underneath here, because the way this is set up, you do not need any jumpers on the breadboard whatsoever. You make all the connections digitally. So this image perhaps outlines even better what this project is. Because if you think about it, all of the lines and columns and rows, or whatever you want to call it, on a breadboard, it is essentially a matrix. And if you have messed around with any kind of coding, be it on microcontrollers using LED matrices before, or just general coding, you will have come across matrix mathematics at some point. And the problem of knowing what is connected to what is essentially a matrix maths problem. So this project page is more like an iterative blog about the project because it's gone through a few changes. At the minute it is using the MT8816AP chips for multiplexing the matrix, and it also uses an Atmel chip, an Atmel 4809 or something like that. And as it mentions up here, which is kind of cool, you can connect 5 of the GPIO pins, so you basically have an Arduino Nano inside every Breadware board. That's tuneful. There's also a lot of interesting blog updates. This one's answering the question, why not use an FPGA? Because it seems like a lot of people are asking that question. And things like testing different matrices and ways of making it work. This is an iterative project, and as the maker says up here, the main reason they're putting it together is they are hopefully want to find some fellow hackers who are equally stoked on Breadware and want to help make it into something where people will wonder how the hell they built anything before it existed. And I think that's a fantastic sentiment. So yes, Breadware is the most interesting thing to happen to breadboards since breadboards, and it's just a wonderful project. I'll leave a link to it in the description, and it is a fantastic read, and I hope this catches on because I love the idea of, logic programmable breadboards. There's something about it that truly appeals to me. Now, various people know that I make this show, so sometimes several people will send the same project to me and say, hey, you should put this on the show, which usually is a good indicator that it's something that will fit on the show, and this is no exception. This is on the Raspberry Pi blog, and it is about a DIY smart bike. It's essentially what this is a bike that will automatically turn the lights on or off for you, so you don't accidentally turn your lights off. And it also has an RFID scanner in it, so that you can track your own riding data when you're riding the bike. You can scan in, as it were, and it will only track you. And then if someone else uses the bike, it won't track them, or it will track their data differently, meaning that you can track exactly what you do and still share a bike, which is quite a nice concept. The project itself is actually a couple of years old. I don't remember seeing this at the time, but having looked into it now, I see that the Instructables page and the GitHub page is all from 2 years ago. Not that that's a problem. We should be celebrating projects no matter when they were made. And it's only just showed up on the Raspberry Pi blog this week, which is probably why so many people have said I should have looked at it. But it is a fascinating build combining a lot of things. These RFID little panels might be familiar to some people. I've used them in the past in tutorials. They're very, very easy to use. They work over the SPI protocol, and as you can see here, this is using a Raspberry Pi along with some kind of extra breakout board. Oh no, that's an LCD screen, isn't it? Yes. And an Arduino, presumably just for using with the RFID scanner, because there are some very robust RFID libraries for Arduino. Now, there's a few other sensors involved in this as well. On this breadboard, there is a light sensor and also a GPS module. And Keanu, the maker of this project, says, the RFID scanner is used with the Arduino. I read out the data from the scanner with the Arduino and send it to the Raspberry Pi with serial USB. The GPS module is also using serial communication. The data the GPS sends to the Raspberry Pi is not that well formatted, so I use a library to parse the data and make it a lot easier to use. The analog values from the LDR are converted using the MPC 3008, which is an analog to digital converter, and then transformed that value to a percentage, i.e. a light percentage from super bright to very dark. Yeah, this is a very this is a very nice write-up of this project, and there is also, as I mentioned, the Instructable here that you can follow, along with the GitHub, which has all of the code you need. Yeah, Keanu Dav is his name on Instructables. Keanu David 1 on GitHub, but I will just link the Raspberry Pi blog here because you can get to both of these pages directly from that. The next project this week, I was really in two minds as to whether I should put in the show because it's me. I am in the process of reviewing the latest offering from Arduino, the Arduino Nano RP2040 Connect. That is the Arduino board with the new Raspberry Pi silicon in it. And that review is ongoing. That won't be done for a while. But while I was just messing around with it, because it has an onboard inertial measurement unit and an onboard microphone, I thought, well, what if we use those for something? I also happen to be quite a fan of the French racing game known as Trackmania. Yeah, I think you can see where this is going. One good turn for the memes, please. Ah! Okay, that's an improvement. Tactical wallbang. Ah! So I will leave it at that. Yes, the inertial measurement unit steers the car and makes the car accelerate, and screaming at it is what makes it brake. If you are interested in seeing me being a little bit more irreverent, it's the first video I've put on my personal YouTube channel in years. I don't really do my own videos anymore, but I thought this would be a fun thing to put together, and so I did. And yeah, it just feels a bit weird putting my own project on the show. However, I will leave a link to this one in the description. I am still very proud of it, and there will be a proper project write-up and tutorial coming on how to use this in a slightly less manic and more formal sense, which I will put on the Electromaker YouTube channel, and sorry, the Electromaker website, and will feature on the show as a more standard tutorial when the time comes. But I was a bit of two minds as to whether I should put this in the show because it is very much shameless self-promotion, but I also thought it would be sort of weird if I didn't. If that makes sense? I hope it makes sense. So moving on to a project by Trevor Atema. This is being written about on Hackaday, and Trevor has taken a Nokia phone shell, the keyboard, the backlight, the phone itself, and a speaker, but then completely redesigned every other part of it to be a custom handheld messaging device that uses long-range Wi-Fi. Now, I've talked so many times on this show about how I love the idea of taking an already existing enclosure and repurposing it and putting new things in it. This is the highest level of that I can think of. This is a custom PCB using a custom programmed microcontroller, and it can send messages between people at up to 20 kilometers in an area without any outside infrastructure. A really interesting idea. The GitHub page for the project is linked out from the Hackaday page, so I'm going to leave a link to the Hackaday page in the description, but this goes through in great detail how this project came together. It uses one of the STM32 lines of microcontrollers, ARM STM32H7, H742VGT6 if you know all the designations off by heart, which I certainly don't. And it also, all the things required to get this going. And presumably there must have been a lot of custom driver software written in order to get this thing working. It's a little bit above my head, I'm not going to lie, but here is a picture of the quite beautiful custom PCB that makes this all work. So yes, the off-the-grid encrypted messaging system, a old Nokia phone repurposed into a long-range Wi-Fi secure messaging service. Such a wonderful idea and a fascinating read on GitHub. As mentioned, I'll leave the Hackaday link in the description. Now, while we all love messing around with microcontrollers and single-board computers just to learn or just to have a bit of fun, there's nothing better than finding a practical use for your DIY electronics hobby. And there's no better thing I can think of than this project that is coming up next on the Arduino blog. Yes, this is a project on the Arduino blog where someone is using a MKR Zer board along with a few sensors in order to check if there's going to be any problems with their sump pump. Now, I am someone who's lived for my entire life on hills or in apartments or in places where there's just not been any need for sump pumps. I've not lived in a flooding area, but I do understand that this is just a daily consideration for some people, that even if there isn't a particularly massive amount of rainfall, any rain getting into the basement needs to be able to drain out, or it just sits there. Doing a little bit of research about what sump pumps were for this article, there's some videos of basements that have gone wrong because they're just rotted essentially, and this is designed to stop that. But sump pumps can get blocked, and then when they get blocked, the water level just rises and rises and rises, and yeah, you don't want that. Hence this very DIY and yet very elegant solution using, like I said, the MKR Zer, which is the Arduino Maker shape of board, which is not dissimilar to the Feather, Adafruit Feather kind of shape of board. It's somewhere between a Nano and a Feather, if I remember correctly, in terms of size. And it has a SAMD chip on it, the SAMD21, the same chip that you find in the Adafruit Feather M0 Plus Express boards, because I've just been writing about one of those, which is why it's fresh in my mind. So here are the components that was used. A photo interrupter, a TCS T1103, if that means anything to you, and it sends a signal if a bobbing piece of plastic gets between the emitter and receiver. So essentially this is a line of sight thing, and when that line of sight is broken, it will send a sensor, it will send, an alarm saying the water level has got to this height, because the only way that line of sight will be broken is if the floating piece of plastic got between the two parts from the emitter and the receiver. And also a time of flight sensor. And I really am interested in time of flight sensors. I haven't played with them enough, but this is a VL53LOX time of flight sensor, which sends a couple of beams towards the water and averages them in order to get a rough idea of how far the water is away from the sensor, which gives you a rough idea about how high the water level is. There is a video for this as well, which links out from the Arduino blog page. I'll just leave a link to the Arduino blog and you can click through to that yourself. The video is great too, by the way. But yeah, a wonderful practical use of Maker Kit. And again, something that fits nicely into this kind of like project idea, because this is still proto board. This is still the way that I would be prototyping something if I was trying to make it. But all you need to do, slap it in a nice enclosure and you have a finished and very useful thing that will help monitor your house. What a nice project. Before moving on, a very quick piece of housekeeping. If you are not already subscribed to the Electromaker YouTube channel, please consider doing so. Just under the video here, this subscription button, you click it, then you are subscribed to our channel. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to get spammed with notifications from us. It just means that when you go to the subscriptions area on your channel, videos will show up. As it happens, this is the only thing that this channel is subscribed to, so there's quite a lot of me in there, but every subscribed video will be here in a nice digest for you. Now, one thing you can do if you really are enjoying the show is sign up for some notifications, and you do that by clicking this little bell here and selecting All. Now, that won't give you desktop notifications unless you've enabled them in your browser, but it will mean that this little notification bell here in the top right will be populated with the shows that we put out. Every time we upload to the channel, you will get a little notification here. However, we upload once a week only to the Electromaker channel. Typically, there are exceptions to that, but mostly once a week. So you will come to YouTube, you'll have a little nice notification mark here, and you will see a show has gone up the moment that it has. And of course, if you like the show, clicking like is very useful too. It doesn't just show us that you like it, but it shows YouTube that you like it. And in fact, all three of these things are really a way of you telling YouTube that you like the show enough that you think it is worth sharing, rather than telling us directly. It does really, really help us. So those three things are things that you can do to help us on YouTube. And there's no obligation to do any of it, but if you do, it will help us a lot. We also have a Discord server, and you can find a link to that in every single video, along with on the Electromaker website. It's free to join, anyone can join it, and we're looking forward to it becoming a nice community where people can share things they're working on and generally chat, and maybe help each other out when they get stuck on a bit of electronic projects and coding and things like that. And finally, we have a shop. I know some of you have been heading to the shop already to get components for your Maker projects. It is massively appreciated. This is definitely the best way that you can support us. It is a direct financial contribution to the show. But in general, if you are supporting the show in any one of the ways I've just said, I would like to thank you so much. This channel is growing quite quickly, and it is very, very nice to see, and it is thanks to you showing us support. So thank you very much for that. But anyhow, let's get on with the rest of the show. It is time for Funding Website Things, which is the part of the show where we look at things on funding websites. We've been typically going to CrowdSupply a lot, and that makes sense. CrowdSupply do microcontroller and single board computers and componentry that all fits perfectly into this show. It's the both maker, hobby, and some more industry-based stuff. It's the kind of thing that makes me very excited to talk about, but there's a load of great stuff on Kickstarter as well, and I feel like we've been neglecting it a bit. So let's dive in and see what we've got. And we are starting with Short Circuits, which is a project that has already been funded many, many times over, but is very, very cool. And I didn't really feel like I could talk about stuff that's happening on Kickstarter without talking about the project itself. Now, before I even go on, I would suggest I'm not going to say this any better than the video itself says. It's a fantastically explained video that explains how it works, what it's for, and the reason behind it existing. But in short, this is someone who's been teaching electronics, both coding and the electronic side of things for some time, and has over time iterated and come up with a set of kits that are designed to help teach, that are easy to put together, but still teach a few fundamentals that are missing in some other places. So for example, there are many kits that will teach you how to code. For example, you can plug things into it and do block-based code with it, but they might not teach you anything about the electronics that are happening. There are a lot of kits that are DIY electronics projects, but they don't necessarily tell you how to code things, and they can be a little bit limited. This seems to get around that by having set modules that do different things. So, as it said, they're launching with 4 different kits. This is the motherboard, and this takes an ATmega 328P chip, I believe, an Arduino chip, and a little coprocessor here, I can't remember what that is, and it breaks it out. The idea being that you put this together yourself, you populate this board yourself, and you put in your little real-time clock battery, I'm assuming what that is here, and you make your own little tiny 8 or 16-bit computer yourself. And then you can start adding things to it. So this is the digitizer, which, as it says, shifts some digits, and there's an RGB matrix here, along with a sensor array that looks like the footprint of a temperature and humidity sensor, and a microphone, along with a few other things. They do also have some more in development, and you can read through to see what the plans are for this. But the higher level view of this, from my standpoint, and again, I don't know this for sure, but that this is someone who really knows not only what works in terms of simple DIY electronics projects, because they have the experience of teaching it, but a way to present it which gives all of the different facets of DIY electronics development. Because as it mentions somewhere further up here, I think this sums it up quite nicely. Here we go. The kits focus on teaching the 4 following skills: soldering, fault finding, circuit design, and coding. And as it says, so much to learn, and it is the truth. Anyone who gets into this in the very early stages can be slightly overwhelmed by the fact that you're not just doing one thing. You're not just learning how to make circuits with electronics. You're not just learning how to code. And when things go wrong, then you have to learn how to find what's wrong before you can fix it. It can be quite heavy. And it seems like this project is a really good way of getting around that. Now, the thing I find most notable about this project isn't actually the fact that it seems so well thought out. And I know I've waxed lyrical about that, but it really does seem that way from my perspective. But even more amazing than that is the price. Because this motherboard, the main board, as I mentioned, I'm now covering up, is £17 for that board, for the entire kit. That's all the components you need, all components, standoff and screws, and the access to the online manual. And then all of the other boards are around the same price. £30 or more gets you a motherboard and a digitizer. Oh, I didn't even realize that. So 17 gets you just the motherboard, 30 gets you the motherboard and digitizer, 30 gets you the motherboard and the sensor array, and I'm pretty much assuming in the RGB matrix, I'm assuming you can pick and choose between them as well. Yes, so if you pledge 44, you get the motherboard and 2 other ones. What I'm basically saying is this is very, very cheap for a kit that seems to be of such a high quality. It seems like it's been really well thought out in so many ways in terms of both cost and the way that it works. So as mentioned at the very start, this Kickstarter has completely blown it out the park. It has made a good 30... Well, how do you even do the maths on that? It's made a lot. It's made 60,000 euros more than it was expecting, and it's deserved. But there are still 26 hours to go on this project. By the time this video goes live, it'll be rather less. But this is a deserved success, and as I say so often, it might not be near Christmas, but this is pure Christmas present bait if you want to get someone you know into this, especially if they're a little bit younger. Yeah, what a lovely project. Short Circuits, a platform for learning electronics. So moving on from DIY electronics teaching aids to using DIY electronics in a product that is designed to help you with your health. Bad posture is an issue. I have had terrible posture for a very long time, partially because I sit down and work a lot. Oh, I stand up and work a lot quite now, but even so, I've struggled with posture for years. And some people just have bad posture. I don't remember ever having decent posture. I've looked into various ways of correcting it. I've looked into posture braces, never really worked for me. I always thought, what if I built a sensor that would sense if I was slouching? That's what this is. And here is what it looks like. So this is essentially a little 3D printed enclosure. Inside the enclosure is a small battery along with a microcontroller, a vibration motor, and a few sensors. And that's more or less it. But it doesn't need to be much smarter than that. It's actually smart in its restraint, I feel. So as you can see here, this is a sort of illustration of how it works. The pendant will sit around your neck, and it isn't a particularly chunky thing. I did wonder when I first saw it if this was actually going to be a little bit too chunky to be useful, but it looks like it's actually quite light. Presumably you could wear it under clothes as well if you didn't want to show it, but the whole idea is they made it quite a nice design, and that design is customizable, which we'll get onto later. And the idea is it works in a couple of ways. Either every few seconds, if it notices your posture is bad, it will remind you, and you will remind you to stand up straight again, or it will remind you every minute if you're trying to sort of get yourself into a little loop that isn't quite so stringent. And that is, again, that's it. That's what it does, and it doesn't need to do anything more. I think I just said this in the last section, but it's impressive to me because of its restraints. They could have tried to stick everything, including the kitchen sink, in there and have an iPhone app for it and everything like that. Looks like they haven't. Side note, I love all the little things they have on this Kickstarter page. Like this flashing warning, are you still sitting up straight? And at the very top, warning, sit up straight before scrolling down. I'll keep that flashing off the screen though. I just realized I probably should have warned before showing any kind of flashing. But still, yes, here I mentioned there's the 60-second mode for natural posture connection and the 5-second mode for immediate posture correction. And then you just switch between the modes by holding down on the posture pendant. Oh, that's the other component that's in there. There's a capacitive touch button in there as well. So you don't actually need to press a button. The thinking behind the design seems quite nice. But anyhow, I've explained everything that this is already. If you are interested, head to the page. There's a huge amount of information on it and how it works. And if you do want to pledge, it is $69 or more for the early bird version of it. So that's €44 for what is essentially a finished product. It is 3D printed, but it's also very, very nice. As mentioned, these 3D prints, you can get download the STL designs for this and then modify it and then send it back to them, and they will print your design before sending it to you. Nice touch. So the posture pendant, available for $69 or around €44 if you're an early bird. They have just reached their goal or are just about to. Nope, they've just gone over it, and there are 26 days to go. So if you are interested in looking into it, you can come and have a look at this Kickstarter page, which I will link in the description of the video. It is time for the mystery box competition once again, and if you aren't familiar, this is a mystery box. It says so right there, and it is chock full of cool little electronics and microcontroller adjacent things, including, of course, microcontrollers provided by the wonderful people at Mauser Electronics. And it's very simple. I try to not be spoiled. I try to not look in the box myself. I reach my hand into the box each week and I pull out another box from the mystery box. And this mystery box is from NXP Semiconductors, and it is an LPC845 breakout board. That is what the mystery box prize is this week, and that name is familiar to me, but let me look it up just quick. Yes, this is familiar to me. I didn't write about this board specifically, but I did come across this board in my research while writing about NXP products. The LPC84X is a series of microcontrollers, and they're actually pretty awesome microcontrollers. And this is an evaluation board for that microcontroller. Now, what you can see over here on the side, if I make it slightly bigger, this here is a capacitive touch button. Which is, this here is this here, in case that wasn't obvious. This is a capacitive touch button, which is attached to the board, or of course you can put it separately and reattach it via wires to put it somewhere you want it to be. And there's a couple of, I can't remember if that's a user button or not. I'll have to look that up again. Oh no, I believe this is the user button. These are the reset and programming buttons. This here is a user potentiometer, which I know that sounds like a very weird thing to be excited about, but I don't think of many microcontroller evaluation boards that have user potentiometers on them. So that's the board that we're giving away. This little chip is one that I've never had my hands on, but like I said, I came across this development board in research once, and looking at the chip again, it seems like it's pretty cool. It's a 30 megahertz chip, but if you look at it here, it has a lot of the things you'd expect to find. It's an ARM Cortex M0 Plus chip, running at 30 megahertz, but it also has SPI and I2C, as you'd imagine, but it has two 10-bit DACs. And whenever I see digital to audio converters, I immediately always just think of synthesizers and music, and I know I am a stuck record. Also, yes, it has the capacitive touch stuff, and NXP in general are very, very good at creating microcontrollers and evaluation boards that are great for capacitive touch. Anyway, I have waffled enough. This is a really nice prize, but we need a prize winner. So our winner this week is Isaac Nix, with a comment on last week's video about Quartz 64. Now this is the Pine 64 development board SBC we were talking about in last week's show, and as he quite sagely points out, this isn't really a consumer device at this stage in the same way that a Raspberry Pi would be a consumer device. This is it still needs a lot of work. They're getting it into developers' hands, so as he says here, they can develop the drivers and improve the kernel. Well worth knowing if you are thinking of getting a Quartz 64. I don't think it's going to put me off getting one, however. But yes, congratulations, Isaac. We'll be in touch with you as to how to get this prize out to you, and apologies if that's not how to pronounce your username. And the mystery box competition will return. We have a few special competitions coming up, but as a general rule, on any given week, I pull something out the mystery box and give it to someone who commented on the previous week's video. You don't need to say anything particularly special, just any comment will do. But for now, let's get on with the rest of our show. We are going to finish this week's show with a little bit of news and a few updates and things that just generally didn't fit into the projects and funding website things sections of the video. And we are beginning by returning to the fantastic Christopher Barnett of explainingcomputers.com. He puts out a yearly state of play for single board computers, and this one is particularly interesting. Now, the why should be relatively obvious because it's been a very strange time for everyone, and of course we are in the middle of a semiconductor shortage as well. I just want to quickly rewind and point out that in case you didn't know, all of the graphics that are in the intro to this, Christopher makes all the models of these himself. He frequently makes these beautiful stylized 3D models of SBCs and microcontrollers. Truly is a fantastic YouTuber. Anyway, I will not go into what is in this video. I will simply suggest you go and watch. There is a lot of information in what is only a 12.5-minute video covering all these different SBCs, the history of SBCs. You can see an early Raspberry Pi here, right through to the compute module here, and there's the Beagle board, I believe. Yeah, just if it's out there, he's pretty much talked about it or reviewed it. His videos, which are these amalgamation videos, have a lot more information in them than most roundup videos I've ever come across. I will leave it at that. Go and watch this video. You will not regret it. So just before moving on, I didn't realize, but this was I think the first video I watched on setting up a Raspberry Pi, but at the time I did not know who Christopher Barnett was not subscribed to his YouTube channel, and the fact that it was one of his videos had completely slipped my mind. For reference, he talks about this video in this video. There's a link to it in the description of the video. This is his first ever video on SBCs, and one that I must have stumbled across because this is definitely the video that I used when I was first looking. I don't think I even owned a Raspberry Pi at the time. I think I wanted one and wanted to know what to do with it, and as many people do, I headed to the internet in order to try and find out what I would need to know. Yeah, complete side points, but yes, thank you, Christopher, for introducing me to Raspberry Pis. I had no idea it was you at the time. Moving on to a very interesting article on the Adafruit website. Now, this is talking about the fact that in the Arduino library manager, there are closed source libraries, which may not sit right with some of you if you are open source advocates. It certainly came as not a bad shock, but a bit of a shock to me because the whole idea of Arduino is open hardware, open software. But some people at Adafruit noticed that there were closed source libraries in the library manager, and one had just been added, which I think is from Microchip. Yes, the Arduino MKR Touch library, which is for Atmel touch sensors, which again is a closed source library. And what actually happened here was quite nice. They reached out to Arduino to ask about it, and the head of Maker Business got back to them with a actually quite considered answer. Now, if you are a complete open source advocate, there's nothing that's going to stop you being angry about this. I understand that, but the answer actually kind of was okay as far as I was concerned. Key things here are the library manager rules, which determine whether a library is indexed or not, do not include and have never included limitations related to source code availability. Something I didn't realize. I thought if you were writing an Arduino library, it had to be open source. Apparently not. It is technically so. Specifically, is it okay to include pre-combined binaries and blobs? Which, as if you have messed around with any kind of pre-compiled stuff, you know there is a risk that that binary might not do what it says it does. It's a security risk, one that we all take on very frequently, but it's still a security risk. So it's technically okay, but should be done carefully, which is a very open-ended sentence, but again, a fairly considered one, I think. There's only two possible circumstances where a closed source library might make sense: when it's released by a chip vendor, which already controls the underlying closed hardware stack anyway, and I'm assuming that's what's happened here because this is a microchip sensor. or someone with a high degree of trust in the community. Now, whether Microchip has a high degree of trust in the community is one thing, but whether their libraries and their software is trustable is another, because millions of things are made using this software. So presumably, if the software is coming from Microchip straight into the Arduino library with no go-betweens, then it is trusted. But again, if you're an advocate of open source and have some real paranoia about the security of all these things, you can probably give me 15 reasons why I shouldn't find that comforting, and I should be even more upset than I am. But in short, if you want to read about this, this is a short but a very interesting article about it, and I will leave a link to it in the description of the video. And this is one of those times when I kind of really am interested to hear other people's opinions. I am sort of on the fence about this. I run Linux on my laptop. I love having everything on that thing be as open source as possible. I love compiling things from source, mostly just because it makes me feel like I know what I'm doing with computers. But if you have an opinion that is for this or against this, that's what I'd like to hear about in the comments this week, actually. If you are someone who can give me a really good reason why I shouldn't be so cool with this, I really do want to hear it. I'm always up for changing my mind. I feel like this is the kind of thing that future Ian would usually say, but if you have been hearing any noises in the background of this video, I apologize. There is a combination right now of it being incredibly hot and humid in Berlin, but also very heavy rain, and they are remaking the facade on the building opposite, which means that they're using pneumatic drills on stone walls, and I don't know how much of that is getting picked up. I do have a limiter on this mic these days to stop background noise being so much of a problem, a noise gate as well, but yeah, there's only so much you can do to keep out the noise of a pneumatic drill. We're going to finish this show with 3 quick things to do with new or newish products. The first being the NASPi case. Now, this is for the Pi 4, and I believe that NASPi isn't new, but the Raspberry Pi 4 version is. I do remember hearing it being talked about for a while. This is something that my colleague Mo Long at Electromaker passed on to me, because I know that he is someone who's very much an advocate of making NASs out of Raspberry Pis, as am I. I've just never actually put one in a nice enclosure. Every single NAS or attempted NAS I have made with a Raspberry Pi, or I've made one with an Atomic Pi as well, is generally a bare SPC next to a bare old computer hard drive with a converter in between. I should really go about making something a bit nicer, because as you can see here, this is a very nice looking little enclosure. It really does look like, a mini computer, but this is specifically designed for working with a NAS. So a couple of notable features here are the fan. There is a PWM fan for cooling the Raspberry Pi in here. And there is also a space specifically for putting your SSD drive in here. It is designed specifically to work as a very fast little NAS. Small footprint, single SSD drive, and a PWM fan to keep things cool. Obviously, this isn't going to go toe-to-toe with any kind of proper networking setup, but it doesn't need to. That's not what it's for. It is designed to be a compact and DIY NAS, and I know there is a bit of custom software that you can set up from NASPi, or you can use one of the many open source builds of NAS for Raspberry Pi things out there. This is just a lovely little device. I really should get around to making a better NAS with my Raspberry Pi. And as always, what with this being an ETA Prime video, there are a lot of examples of it working. As you can see here, this will work as a regular Raspberry Pi enclosure if you want it to be, although it is generally set out to be a NAS. So I will leave a link to this video in the description. We're going to close this week's show with a duo of new products, and I'm going to rely on the fantastic CNX software to go over both of them. We're beginning with M5 Stack. Now, if you aren't familiar, they make fantastic little ESP32 module development board kits, hobby boards, whatever you want to call them, all roughly in this sort of form factor. And they all have several things in common. They all have several useful sensors or things you might want to use on board. They vary from things like touchscreens to temperature and humidity sensors, and various nice things for both hobby and more industrial development. They always usually have a few extra GPIOs on for connecting to things, and onboard battery power as well. And this one appears to be no different. This one is tackling LoRaWAN. This is a long-range communicator, and it uses the ESP32 Atom. And now this little thing here, you can see this is the ESP32 module. And I think this is a really nice idea, because you can program this thing completely independently of the rest of the stack and then just pop it on here. Or you can have things that do various different tasks and just have one broadcast system and plop them in and change them out. It's just a very nice idea. Those of you that do work in more industrial settings will notice that this is a familiar number as well. RS485 is a fairly well-known serial protocol, and yes, it's a great way for talking between things in industrial environments. Again, something that as a home gamer I haven't had too much time to fiddle with, but I do understand that it is very much a standard. And for that reason I feel like this is quite interesting. It's M5 Stack have made kind of quite nice, easy to use things designed at the hobby market, I feel like, so far, whereas this looks a little bit more industrial, like something you might set up in a factory or a small business in order to monitor things and send sensor information over mid to longer distances. Anyway, as always, the CNX software, which I will link, has all of the information you need, along with a link to the M5 Stack shop, where this board is available for $32.50. Staying with CNX software and the ESP32, this is a little development kit for the ESP32-S2, the more recently released ESP32 chip, which is still very loved. If you remember, I believe 3 weeks ago now, or maybe a month ago, we featured a board that the Unexpected Maker had made based around the very same ESP32-S2 chip. It is a single-core ESP32 processor, but don't let that put you off. It is still a very powerful and capable chip. So here is a picture of the board itself, and this is designed more to be a interface for, let's say, a kiosk or something. It's the kind of thing that traditionally a lot of people would use a Raspberry Pi for, although of course there's no need to necessarily use a Raspberry Pi for that. This will do the job perfectly well. And as mentioned, here is the ESP32-S2 Rover module. It comes with a fairly chunky Li-ion battery on it, and connectors for all your different things. So there's I2C, SPI, programming, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting one, this. I feel like this is definitely more aimed towards industrial development markets and aimed towards people who are trying to make either kiosks or maybe make this into some kind of smart speaker or smart media player. But by the same token, I feel like this is everything you would need if you were interested in making an interface for yourself. Let's say you use various Wi-Fi connected modules in your DIY smart home setup. This might be a quite nice central hub for making a completely DIY controller for it. I don't know. It's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of it. So this all sounds very good. However, there is one issue, at least at this stage. This thing is not for sale, or at least not in any way that is easy to do. This is, by the way, this comes straight from Espressif. This comes from the people who are the creators and the makers of the ESP32 and the ESP8266 chip series. This isn't a third party. This is something that Espressif have put together to sell. And as I said, since this does sort of fit quite nicely into the development and more industry side of things, while I'm sure hobby makers would find it interesting too, at this stage you have to just contact them and they will tell you how much they cost, and they're probably going to want to send more than one to you, so it might be worth waiting out to see when these go on general sale and how much they will cost. But the idea behind it is something that I find quite nice. There are many different kits out there which combine these things, but the fact that this comes straight from Espressif and is such a beautiful custom built board appealed to me, and I thought it might appeal to you too. So I will leave a link to this in the description of the video. There's a few links in the article as well that link out to the GitHub page. There's a translation of some of the documentation for it here as well, that also talks about what is available, so the hardware stuff here and how to get started and compile an example project if you do manage to get a hold of one and are wondering what to do with it. So that was our show for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll be back next week with another Electromaker show. In the meantime, thank you so much for all the support you are showing to this YouTube channel. Also, thank you to all of you going to the Electromaker store to buy things for your hobby projects. That really helps us out a lot. And don't forget, we have a Discord server if you want to join into the conversation. I haven't got around to posting my latest project in there yet, but I will be, and I'm really looking forward to seeing yours as well. But for now, as always, I hope you have a safe, creative, and fun week, and I will see you in the next show.